In 2019, 68 people died, 129,000 people were displaced, and billions of naira was lost across the country due to flooding. This has become a yearly ritual. The flood warnings are given to the states, those flood warnings are ignored, the floods come with their devastation, the state governors ask for compensation, and the cycle repeats itself every year. Will 2021 be any different? My guest on the program is the Director of Planning, Research and Forecasting at the National Emergency Management Agency. And he talks to us about mapping flood-prone communities. But what are the permanent solutions? And as we do every week, we take you to Nigeria's seat of power with our Abuja wrap. This is Dateline Abuja. Hello and welcome to Dateline Abuja. I am Kayla Magwa. We thank God for the rain. We pray for it. Farmers depend on it. The rain is our friend. But the rain comes with devastation, which, to be honest, can be avoided. In Nigeria, the rain brings fear in the hearts of many because of this devastation, a reality they must deal with every year. We'll get to that shortly, but first, it's time to update you on the major happenings from the seat of power.
Vice President Professor Yemi Osinbajo is blaming corruption and lack of transparency, among other factors, for poor contract negotiations in Nigeria. The Vice President made the comment while addressing a two-day capacity-building workshop for negotiators organized by the Independent Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offences Commission.
Corruption is always a key factor in some of these badly done contracts. It was present, as you've seen, in the Simandu story, in the stories of the strategic alliance contracts. Of course, we know that there have been very serious allegations also of corruption. Some of these are the subject of court cases even today. Also in the P&ID case, of course, you know that one of the reasons why we got a favorable judgment in England was on account of the fact that corruption was found to have tainted several of these agreements. Several of it was found to have tainted the implementation of the agreements. So there is no question at all that corruption plays a very huge role, which is why monitoring is important, which is why accountability is important. And those who draft contracts that eventually turn out in this way ought to be held to account. There is a lack of transparency and due process involved, where commercial contracts go bad, that is. And this ranges from not advertising or opening up opportunities to other potential investors, or not subjecting agreements to established legislative and treaty ratification processes. And it's essential to clear draft agreements with relevant agencies of government and with the body authorized to approve such contracts or agreements, like the Federal Executive Council. Sometimes you find that huge contracts are drawn up without following, any of these processes.
Meanwhile, Professor Osinbajo is leading the federal government's collaboration with the United Nations to improve Nigeria's food systems. He presented the Nigeria Food Systems Mapping Report to state governments across the 6 geopolitical zones. Professor Osinbajo made the presentation at a consolidatory dialogue for the UN Food Systems Summit.
Imagine a generation of adults who suffer arrested physical and mental development, and the social and economic burden on their families, on their communities, and on the nation. Imagine the implications of approximately 50% of Nigeria's population being at risk if we don't get it right. So it's now up to us from here on to own the process and be ready to translate the recommendations of these dialogues to prompt action.
In the meantime, the federal government requires the cooperation of states, council areas, and mining communities for the mining sector to become adequately beneficial to Nigeria. The Vice President gave the insights during the maiden edition of the Strategic Engagement on Sustainable Mining.
I think the ministry has been very fortunate in having able, dynamic, and far-sighted ministers since we came into office in 2015. Well done indeed. I can only encourage you to continue to approach your role as the regulator and administrator of the nation's mines and steel sector with open-mindedness and flexibility, especially in your collaboration with the states and local governments. I must also urge all officers of the ministry to rededicate themselves to the realization of the set target of a 6% contribution of the mining sector to the nation's GDP by 2025. Finally, let me say to all participants that this engagement is one that could be a game changer for mining in Nigeria, and it could mean a new era of huge earnings and prosperity for our people from our mining resources. But this will only happen if we adopt a collaborative and cooperative approach. If we work together, we will reap far more than we could ever gain by working alone.
The Chief Justice of Nigeria, Justice Tanko Mohammed, is appealing to the 18 newly sworn-in justices of the Court of Appeal to avoid accepting juicy but destructive gifts while discharging their judicial functions. He gave the charge after the swearing-in ceremony.
You must, against all odds, conduct your affairs within the ambit of the law and the oath that has just been administered on you. If you are hitherto 50% under public scrutiny, I assure you now that it has risen to 100% by virtue of this elevation to the Court of Appeal. All eyes are on you.
The National Assembly has finally passed the Petroleum Industry Bill. The piece of legislation seeks, among other things, to promote transparency, good governance and accountability in the administration of petroleum resources in Nigeria. Lawmakers in the House of Representatives have rejected an amendment calling for the reversal of the federal government's suspension of Twitter. The Deputy Minority Leader of the House, Mr. Tobi Okechukwu, had moved an amendment to the report of the Ad Hoc Committee on Twitter suspension, asking the federal government to lift the suspension in consideration of its negative impact on businesses. The federal government has concluded plans to procure 29.8 million doses of Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccines by September 2021. Executive Director of the National Primary Healthcare Development Agency, Dr. Faisal Shuaib, made this known during the weekly briefing of the Presidential Steering Committee. The Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice, Mr. Abubakar Malami, has announced the arrest of the self-acclaimed leader of the Independent People of Biafra, IPOB, Mr. Nnamdi Kanu. Mr. Malami made the announcement at a joint news conference with the Inspector General of Police and the leadership of the Department of State Services. The federal government is assuring that the leader of the indigenous people of Biafra, Mr. Nnamdi Kanu, will get a fair trial. The Minister of Information and Culture, Alhaji Lai Mohammed, gave the assurance during a briefing in Abuja. The Department of State Services has declared Yoruba rights activist Mr. Sunday Adeyemo, popularly known as Sunday Igboho, wanted. The spokesperson of the service, Mr. Peter Afunaya, also confirmed that its operatives carried out a midnight raid on his residence in the Soka area of Ibadan, Oyo State.
Welcome back. Now let's get into today's feature story. We're looking at flooding in the FCT and the administration's attempt at being proactive before the floods get here. This week, the FCT Emergency Management Agency reviewed the flood outlook for the nation's capital and came up with steps that should be taken to avoid any disaster. Last year, 13 people died from the floods and over 400 were displaced. The plan is to take that figure all the way down in 2021.
The rains are here, and residents of some parts of the nation's capital will not forget some of the tragedies of last year. According to the FCT Emergency Management Agency, the nation's capital recorded at least 82 flood-related disasters. Houses and farmlands were washed away as the heavy downpour claimed several lives in Gwagwalada, Suleja, and other parts of the nation's capital. According to the FCT Emergency Management Agency, 13 lives were lost and over 400 people were displaced. This is part of the effort to mitigate the impact of the disaster.
This forum provides an opportunity to update and strengthen the emergency preparedness and response plan, which clearly spells out specific roles by all actors in various emergency situations in the Federal Capital Territory. It is almost impossible to prevent, mitigate, or respond effectively if we continue to rely on our old strategies. In this light, the emergencies we face today require timeliness and precision to tackle, which can only be achieved through deployment of technology.
According to the Nigerian Meteorological Agency, the northern part of the country should expect rains from May, with the peak expected in June. The FCT is in the north-central region of the country. Over the years, the FCT has had a fair share of flood disaster. In 2012, Nigeria witnessed her worst flood disaster. Gwagwalada was the only town that witnessed a disaster back then. Before then, flood was not a common phenomenon in the Federal Capital Territory. But this has changed as residents now have to contend with floods almost every time there is a heavy downpour.
Going by the prediction by NIMET, there have been some, delays in the onset of rainy season. The fear we in hydrology, flood management, are having is this. There's likely going to be a shorter duration of rainfall this year in most of the states. Instead of spreading over a period of long time, it might come within a few months, maybe 3 months. And when you have high rainfall intensity and of a shorter duration, it will aggravate to flooding. It will, translate to flooding. And if there are no escape routes, in terms if we are having blocked drainages and they're building within the floodplains, that will mean more. It could lead to loss of property and, God forbid, loss of lives, like what happened last year, Threadmore Estate, Sunday Dewisi Estate, and other places too.
In August 2017, tragedy struck when a man and 2 of his children died while trying to drive out of one of the estates in Lokogoma, a suburb in the Federal Capital Territory. On Saturday, June the 2nd, 2018, 6 people died when floodwaters overran a culvert and took with it a Sienna bus with 4 passengers and a motorcycle with passengers in Karshi suburb. On August the 2nd, 2019, a director at the FCT High Court died in a flood close to the Galadimawa roundabout. The FCT Emergency Management Agency have been carrying out an assessment of flood-prone areas, as well as those that were impacted in last year's flood. Aside from enlightening the residents of the area in danger, the FCT administration is adopting emergency response plans that prevent any disaster.
Emergency response plan, collectively put together and periodically reviewed by the stakeholders, will enhance coordination of activities and avoid a situation where stakeholders work at cross purposes when they meet in the field, and to be on the same page, knowing that what they are all respectively supposed to do. We have continued to provide resources to maintain critical city infrastructure such as drainages and lighting up dark alleys, and we are committed to continue to do more.
The agency is advising community leaders to ensure compliance to sensitization messages regarding waste disposal and avoid building and farming along waterways.
My guest on the program is Mr. Alhassan Nuhu, the Director of Planning, Research and Forecasting at the National Emergency Management Agency. Is 2021 going to be business as usual? Advocacy with no substantial impact? Mapping flood-prone communities and putting up flood barriers are great ideas from Mr. Nuhu, but what are the long-term solutions? Please watch this. Mr. Nuhu, welcome to Dateline Abuja.
Thank you very much.
For the first time, NEMA is publishing a disaster risk management report. Why hasn't this been done over the years, and what informed making this report for 2021?
Well, you know, early warning is a system. It's a system, not just a mechanism. And system has subsystems. The subsystems are risk knowledge, accurate and reliable forecast, number 2. Number 3, dissemination of that reliable forecast to responsible authorities and to communities at risk. And number 4 is the capacity of the responsible authorities and the communities at risk to be able to understand these warnings and act on them. So if you have a breakdown of any component of the subsystem, the whole system collapses. This is why NEMA comes in. 1, to have an early warning, you have to have knowledge of the risks ab initio. You have to know the hazards around you and the associated risk. This is where NEMA comes in. And again, in the area of dissemination of that warning, and in the area of building the capacity of those who will act on the warning, and then the communities whom that are at risk of these disasters. And there is a global consensus that actually the problem with early warning system is not in the accuracy or reliability of the forecast. It's not with the knowledge of the risk. It is more with disseminating it, and much more with the capacity of those who take action to even understand it and act on it. So NEMA put together a committee of 21 experts from across all the sectors of the economy: NIMET, NISA, the Space Agency, the aviation sectors, agric, all experts in this country were put together to work more on the documents, the seasonal climate prediction of NIMET and the annual flood outlook of NISA, to digest it, to bring out in more clear terms the disaster implication of those climate services. And this is what was done. And we have disseminated it to all the states affected, likely to be affected. There are so many implications of this climate services forecast, which we have digested, simplify it, and bring it more closer to those who take action, and then bring it more closer to communities that are likely to be affected. So
that's actually what my question is. The fact that this is the first time that this disaster risk management report is being released. Is this an admission that maybe the way it's been working over the years hasn't been yielding as much results as it should, and maybe this is NEMA's way of trying to, you know, have different results this year with this report?
Yeah, it's an improvement. This gathering of experts really didn't start this year. It started as far back as 2010. Every year we do it, then we disseminate to relevant ministries, departments, and agencies, and to relevant to affected states. What we did this year is to call a press conference and then present it formally to the general public. It's an improvement of what has been going on over the years.
I know that there have been so many sensitization workshops, and you do this every year, some sort of sensitization, especially in flood-prone communities. Yes. But it doesn't seem to be yielding as much results as we would expect it to. What's going to be different this year? Well, we are focusing more on the communities directly.
You know, DRR is something that you need to continue doing on a continuous basis and to involve everybody. It doesn't end with the ministries, with the department and agencies. You have to go down to the community level. And this we are trying to do, and we are encouraging every other stakeholders to do the same.
Something that you've advocated for is the mapping of communities. In fact, it's called the mapping of communities with high probable flood risk.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? And how are you going to achieve that?
Well, you know, NISA, when they released their annual flood outlook, it was very clear that there is a very high probability of flooding in 121 local governments across 27 states of the Federation.
121 local governments.
And a moderate probability in 302 local governments across the 36 states of the Federation, including the FCT. So what we are doing is to target on the high probable areas, to map those areas, to know exactly where the flood is going to happen. You map it with the intention of, one, identifying the area, two, getting a safe haven when the flood comes, areas that you can evacuate people to.
So that's basically the plan, is to evacuate people who are living in these flood-prone
to know the
areas.
flood-prone areas, and then to evacuate them, and then to also preposition resources that you can be able to respond to them adequately and timely. So the mapping is important in a number of ways. One, it zeroed down your sensitization campaign to particular areas. Two, it gives you opportunity to identify safe areas, even within the flood-prone areas, where you can evacuate people. And then again, you can pre-position resources.
All right, well, before I let you go, you suggested the modification of settlements to withstand floods, putting up flood barriers and you know, things like that. How are you going to get that? Are you going to work with the mapping? So when you map out those communities, are you going to now start to put the flood barriers in those places? How is this supposed to work?
We engage the state government, the local government authorities to collectively work together, identify the vulnerable areas, identify the particular mitigation strategies that will be applicable, and then together we join resources to put them in place.
Well, Mr. Nuhu, you have your work cut out for you. Thank you so much for being with us on Dateline Abuja.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Floods are inevitable, but its effects can be mitigated. All it takes is political will and matching words with action. It may be easier for leaders to do nothing and seek compensation when the devastation from flooding happens, but that's just wrong, and history will judge such leaders. As a people, we should seek to make our country better than we met it. So, avoid building on floodplains. Keep your gutters clean, and if you live in a flood-prone area, it's time to consider moving. That's Dateline Abuja this week. Remember to let us know the happenings in your neighborhood using the social media handles showing right now on your screen. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Kayla Magwa. See you next time.